Ethan sat by the large window of his small cabin, watching the rain lash against the glass. The storm had started suddenly, dark clouds rolling across the sky, and now the wind whistled around the isolated cabin on the outskirts of the research outpost. He rubbed his eyes and looked at the papers scattered across the table, charts, notes, and sketches of atmospheric readings from the planet's surface. The storm was extraordinary, even for this planet, and he couldn't help but feel both excited and nervous. Nature had a way of reminding humans just how small they could be, even in the middle of scientific advancement. Lightning flashed, illuminating the forest outside in stark white for a brief moment. Thunder followed almost immediately, shaking the wooden walls of the cabin. Ethan reached for his coffee mug and sipped it slowly, trying to ignore the unease settling in his stomach. He had lived on this planet for months, alone, gathering data for the Interstellar Research Council. Solitude was part of the job, and he had grown used to it, or at least, he thought he had. The storm was testing him in a way he hadn't expected. A sudden tap at the window made him jump. His heart raced as he set down his mug and approached cautiously. Rain streamed down the glass, and for a moment he thought it was just a branch moving in the wind. Then he saw it, a figure, almost ethereal, pressed against the glass. Ethan blinked, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. The figure was tall and slender, with skin that seemed to shimmer faintly even in the dim light of the storm. Her eyes were large and luminous, reflecting the flashes of lightning outside. She raised a hand as if to knock again, and for a moment Ethan felt frozen in place. "Hello," he called, his voice trembling slightly. The figure tilted her head, her expression cautious but not hostile. Something about her presence was disarming. She didn't seem threatening at all. After a long pause, she tapped again, softer this time, as though asking permission rather than demanding attention. Ethan stepped back and hesitated. Part of him wanted to retreat, to close the blinds and pretend he hadn't seen anything. But curiosity and concern outweighed fear. He opened the window just a crack. "Do you need help?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. The alien, he realized she must be an alien, though her form was vaguely humanoid, nodded quickly. She spoke in a series of melodic sounds that Ethan couldn't understand. Her eyes held a depth of emotion he had never seen before, and he could sense urgency beneath her calm demeanor. He gestured toward the cabin door. "You can come in," he said slowly, unsure if she would understand. She nodded again and stepped inside without hesitation, shaking droplets of rain from her long, glowing hair. She moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural, gliding across the floor without making a sound. Ethan watched in awe as she settled near the fireplace, pulling her knees close to her chest. She was smaller than he expected, delicate-looking, but there was an intelligence in her eyes that seemed to command attention. He busied himself with the fireplace, striking a match and coaxing the flames to life. The warmth seemed to comfort her, and she let out a soft sigh, closing her eyes briefly. "Are you okay?" he asked, still cautious. She opened her eyes and looked at him directly. There was something in her gaze, a mix of gratitude and hesitation, that made him feel an odd connection. She pointed to herself, then to the storm outside, and finally to him. Ethan nodded slowly, beginning to understand. She was seeking shelter. The storm raged on, and as the minutes passed, the cabin seemed smaller, warmer, and more alive than it had ever been before. Ethan offered her a blanket, and she accepted it, wrapping it around herself with careful movements. He could see the faint glow of her skin through the fabric, a reminder that she was unlike anything he had encountered in his scientific studies. "Do you understand me?" he asked, not sure if she could speak his language. She shook her head but smiled faintly, her expression gentle. He realized that communication would take time, patience, and observation. Ethan moved to the table and grabbed a notebook and pen. He drew a simple sketch of himself and pointed to it. Then he drew a small cabin and pointed to her. She tilted her head, understanding immediately, and sketched a small lightning bolt. Ethan nodded, impressed. They could communicate slowly with pictures and gestures. Hours passed and the storm showed no sign of slowing. Ethan offered her food and water, which she accepted carefully, tasting each item as if trying to understand its nature. She pointed to him, then to the food, and made a soft, questioning sound. He chuckled nervously. "Yes, you can eat," he said. It was strange but comforting how quickly they adapted to each other's presence. At some point, the storm intensified. The wind howled like a living creature, rattling the windows and shaking the doorframe. The cabin groaned under the force, and Ethan felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his chest. The alien looked frightened for the first time, hugging herself tightly. Without thinking, he moved closer, offering his hand. She hesitated, then took it, and he felt the faint warmth of her skin. "Don't worry," he said softly. "We'll be fine." She looked at him, her eyes wide, and for the first time she spoke a single word in his language. "Cold." Ethan nodded, realizing that she was trying to explain why she had come so close to him. She needed warmth. Not just shelter, but warmth in the literal sense, perhaps even something deeper that he couldn't yet comprehend. As the storm reached its peak, she made a sudden, unexpected move. She crawled onto his bed, a small space in the corner of the cabin that he had prepared for himself. Ethan froze, unsure of what to do. Her expression was earnest, and she seemed to be seeking safety rather than intimacy. The blanket covered her partially, and her glowing skin reflected the flickering light of the fireplace. Ethan felt a rush of embarrassment and confusion. He wanted to explain that he was not used to this, but the words failed him. She seemed so small, so vulnerable, and yet there was an undeniable strength in her presence. He realized that she was trusting him completely, relying on him in a way that humans rarely did with strangers. He cleared his throat and looked away, focusing on the storm outside. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You can stay there." She smiled faintly, a gesture that made his heart pound. It was not a romantic smile, but one of relief and trust. They sat in silence, listening to the storm together, two beings from entirely different worlds brought together by circumstance. Ethan's mind raced with questions about her species, her world, and how she had survived the storm outside. But for now, all that mattered was that she was safe. He fetched another blanket and draped it over the bed, careful not to disturb her. She shifted slightly, resting her head on the pillow, and closed her eyes. Ethan watched her, fascinated by every detail, from the way her fingers glowed faintly in the firelight to the subtle patterns of her skin. He wondered what kind of life she had lived, what dangers she had faced to arrive here in this remote corner of the galaxy. Time passed slowly. The storm began to subside, though the rain still fell in heavy sheets. Ethan moved to the table, scribbling notes and sketches, trying to understand her physiology and reactions without intruding on her rest. Every so often he glanced at her, marveling at how delicate she seemed and how alive she was, even in this vulnerable state. Finally, as the night grew quieter, she stirred. Her eyes opened and she looked at him, blinking slowly. Ethan smiled gently. "Morning will come soon," he said. "You'll see the sun." She tilted her head, curious about this new word, sun, and he pointed toward the window where faint light had begun to break through the clouds. She seemed to understand, and a small, almost shy smile appeared on her lips. Ethan realized that this night had created a connection between them, one that went beyond language or species. It was a bond of trust, of mutual reliance, and perhaps, in a way he couldn't yet articulate, friendship. As the first rays of light filtered through the wet forest, Ethan felt a sense of wonder and responsibility. This alien being had come into his life unexpectedly, during a storm that threatened to isolate them both, and yet here she was, resting in his cabin, relying on him. He knew that the coming days would bring challenges, communication, understanding her needs and ensuring her safety. But for now, he simply watched her sleep, feeling a mixture of awe, curiosity, and a faint blush at the thought of the closeness they had shared. The storm had passed, but the memory of it lingered in the warmth of the cabin, in the quiet trust between two beings from different worlds, and in the realization that sometimes the universe had a strange way of bringing people together when they needed it most. The first rays of the sun streamed through the wet forest, casting a soft glow across the cabin. Ethan sat quietly at the edge of the bed, watching Lyra stir. Her eyes slowly opened, glowing faintly as she blinked in the morning light. She turned her gaze toward him, and he smiled gently, careful not to startle her. Despite the lingering embarrassment from last night, he felt a warm sense of responsibility. She had trusted him completely, and he was determined to honor that trust. "Good morning," he said softly. She tilted her head, mimicking the phrase as best as she could, then let out a soft, melodic sound that might have been her way of acknowledging it. Communication between them was still slow, but it was improving. Ethan had realized that patience was key. She was intelligent, curious, and careful, but she also needed time to adjust to human ways. Lyra slowly got up from the bed, her movements fluid and graceful. She stretched, the faint glow of her skin flickering with the shifting light. Ethan observed her, fascinated. She seemed to notice his attention and gave a small, almost shy smile. He turned his gaze toward the table and grabbed some paper and a pen, wanting to continue their makeshift communication. He drew a sun, pointing toward the window, then drew a figure shivering and another figure offering warmth. Lyra's eyes widened as she followed the drawing. She pointed to herself, then to him, and finally made a soft sound. Ethan understood immediately. She had a need that was unusual for her species, perhaps connected to the storm. "Last night, you needed warmth," he said carefully, trying to phrase it simply. She nodded, confirming his understanding with a delicate smile. He realized that it wasn't fear or misunderstanding that had brought her so close, but a natural, instinctive reaction, something vital for her survival. This knowledge eased his embarrassment slightly, and he felt a renewed sense of respect for her. Breakfast passed quietly. Ethan prepared simple food, which she examined cautiously before tasting. Her reactions were subtle, but it was clear she appreciated the effort. He noticed how observant she was, her large eyes taking in every detail of the cabin. She seemed fascinated by human objects, the way the fire flickered, the texture of paper, and the sound of his voice. Every small interaction felt like a learning moment for both of them. After breakfast, Ethan decided it was time to address the storm's aftermath. The heavy rain had caused minor flooding near the cabin, and some of the structural beams had been weakened. "We need to check the cabin," he said, motioning for Lyra to follow. She nodded, her movements cautious but confident. Despite the language barrier, they worked together seamlessly. She lifted small objects, handed him tools, and helped him assess the damage. Ethan marveled at her intelligence and adaptability. While she was not human, her reasoning skills were sharp, and she seemed to understand cause and effect naturally. She also had a keen sense of awareness, alert to dangers he might have missed. Working together, they reinforced the cabin, cleared debris, and ensured that the structure could withstand another storm if it came. As the morning wore on, the sun broke fully through the clouds, casting warm light across the forest. Ethan led Lyra to the window and pointed outside. "Sun," he said, emphasizing the word. She tilted her head, looking at the light and making a soft sound that might have been her attempt to repeat it. Ethan smiled. It was small moments like these that built trust and connection between them. After securing the cabin, they returned inside. Lyra seemed restless, shifting slightly as if she wanted to explain something important. Ethan noticed her gaze flicker toward him, then toward the bed where she had slept. He felt a familiar blush rising, but he focused on maintaining calm and patience. "Do you want to explain?" he asked gently, unsure if she could respond in words. She nodded, then retrieved a small device from her clothing, a translator of some kind. Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. She activated it and a soft, clear voice emerged. "My species, when caught in storms, we need warmth. Not danger, not fear, warmth from a trusted being. It is how we survive." Ethan listened intently, fascinated. "So, it's a survival instinct?" he asked. The device repeated his words in her melodic voice. She nodded quickly, her large eyes fixed on him. Ethan realized that this instinct was part of her biology, a trait that had evolved for safety during extreme weather. The thought made him admire her even more. "It does not mean anything else," the device added. "Trust only, safety only." Ethan smiled, relieved. "I understand," he said. "You were scared and you trusted me. That's all that matters." Lyra's face relaxed, and she let out a soft, musical sound that seemed almost like laughter. Ethan chuckled, feeling the tension ease from both of them. Despite the unusual circumstances, he felt proud of how they had communicated and supported each other. The day passed with more small lessons. Ethan taught Lyra about human customs, simple tools and objects inside the cabin. She watched and copied, sometimes perfectly, sometimes with small mistakes that made him laugh quietly. In turn, she demonstrated small abilities unique to her species, subtle ways of sensing temperature, light, and sound that fascinated him. Each new discovery deepened his respect for her intelligence and adaptability. By afternoon, Ethan realized it was time to consider the next step. Lyra could not stay indefinitely, and he needed to ensure her safe return. "Do you have a home?" he asked, pointing to the outside world. She nodded, activating the translator again. "My ship landed nearby. Storm made travel dangerous. Needed shelter." Ethan nodded, understanding. He had spent weeks studying this planet, and he knew the terrain could be treacherous, especially after a storm. "We'll get you there safely," he said. They prepared for the journey. Ethan packed supplies, ropes, and waterproof gear, while Lyra followed silently, her eyes scanning every detail of the cabin as if storing it in memory. When they stepped outside, the forest glistened with rain, droplets catching the light. The air smelled fresh, clean, and alive. Ethan felt a thrill of adventure mixed with responsibility. He had faced storms before, but guiding an alien being across unfamiliar terrain added a new dimension to his courage and resourcefulness. The walk was slow but steady. Lyra stayed close, trusting him completely. Ethan noticed how she adapted to human ways, observing carefully and mimicking his steps when needed. When they reached a tricky slope, he offered his hand, and she took it without hesitation. The bond of trust was evident in every gesture. Eventually, the silhouette of her ship appeared among the trees. It was sleek, metallic, and unlike anything Ethan had seen. Lyra paused, her eyes scanning it with a mixture of relief and anticipation. Ethan felt a pang of sadness at the thought of parting, but he reminded himself that safety was the priority. They approached the ship, and Lyra activated the translator one last time. "Thank you, human. Your warmth, your kindness, it is rare. You have shown what humans can be." Ethan's heart swelled with pride. "It was nothing," he said softly. "You trusted me, and that's all I needed." She smiled, her glowing eyes reflecting sunlight. "It was everything." Before boarding, she handed him a small token, a delicate crystal that pulsed faintly with light. Ethan accepted it carefully, realizing it was a symbol of trust and friendship from her species. He felt a deep sense of honor. This simple gift represented a connection between worlds, one that transcended language, biology, and distance. Lyra entered her ship, turning once to wave before the door sealed. Ethan watched as the vessel lifted gracefully, cutting through the sky until it disappeared beyond the horizon. He stood there for a long moment, feeling the wind on his face and the warmth of the sun on his skin. Despite the brief encounter, he had experienced something extraordinary, an example of how empathy, patience, and courage could bridge the gap between entirely different beings. Returning to his cabin, Ethan reflected on the events of the past 24 hours. The storm had tested him, challenged him, and ultimately rewarded him with a profound lesson in trust and kindness. Humans, he realized, were not defined merely by strength or technology, but by their ability to connect, to care, and to act with understanding in moments of uncertainty. He placed the crystal on the table near the window and watched it pulse softly, a reminder that the universe was vast, full of mysteries, and yet full of possibilities for connection. Lyra had shown him that trust could be universal, and he vowed to remember that lesson in every challenge he faced from that day onward. As evening fell, Ethan prepared his notes for the council, documenting the storm, the alien, and the remarkable ways in which trust had bridged worlds. He smiled faintly, feeling both humble and proud. Humanity, in all its curiosity, courage, and kindness, had earned a quiet victory that night, one that no technology, weapon, or discovery could ever replace. And though he might never see Lyra again, the memory of her presence, the soft glow of her skin, the trust in her eyes, and the warmth they had shared, would stay with him forever, a testament to the unexpected wonders that could arise when two beings chose to trust each other. Even in the middle of a storm,